Well, everyone, it is our event that we've scheduled for today. It's just our guru mentor, Ed Hatton, is delayed. I just want to remind you that, when we talk about seeing opportunity and devastation, the stories normally to inspire come from Ed. So he's got some technical challenges and so on. And but you can obviously go and listen to all the podcasts on our YouTube channel, Griffin Enterprise Development, and you can go subscribe over there. So every time we publish an edited version of the the playback that you can get here on this channel, of course, on Clubhouse, um, then you are quite welcome to do so. Um, so we will leave playbacks for a limited time only, but if you're looking for something in particular, you'll find it then on the YouTube channel. Once again, it's Griffin Enterprise Development, and Griffin is spelled Gryphon. Um, Welcome, Ed. And I spoke there about your technical challenges to join as our guru mentor. So I want to hand over to you. And yeah, we look forward to hearing what you got for us today. Over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Jacques. Yeah, last week we couldn't speak to you because of power outages and technical glitches on my side. Um, and we've said, well, life presents challenges. You must get over the challenges. Had more challenges today. That's why I'm a little late. But we get over the challenges. And I wanted to talk about that today. And in particular about load shedding, because load shedding, I think the ESCOM chairman has confirmed, load shedding is with us for 2 years. And at sort of stages 1 to 3 for 2 years. Now, if the ESCOM chairman says that, you better not believe that's not the worst case scenario. That is probably the hopeful scenario rather than the realistic one.
Oh, don't say that, Ed.
Yeah, no, no, I'm going to depress a lot of people by saying this. But the fact of the matter, in 2 years' time, will that be enough time to get our power stations and our transmission lines and everything up to running at sufficient efficiency to provide for our well-being? And I'm discounting the ships offshore um, that themselves, I believe, take about a year to build. So, and they don't provide a huge amount of power into the grid. So I don't think they're going to rescue us. And I can't see us building new power stations in the short term. Um, the independent power producers, the green power, the solar and wind, uh, are quicker to build than nuclear or coal-fired stations, but they also have limits in their capacity. So I don't think we're going to get rescued in the near future, and we may in fact be facing a future of longer than 2 years, and perhaps at times higher than stage three. Now that's our business future. Let's just take it on the chin and say that is the environment we are going to have to operate in over the next foreseeable future, the next couple of years, which is probably our planning horizon now anyway. Now, what are you going to do about it? Well, we've heard a lot of stories of companies that are folding. They've said load shedding is making their business unprofitable, therefore, they've got to close down. And that's very sad because that closes down a business. It adds to our massive unemployment queue. Um, it puts more burden on a state that is less able to pay for it because it's getting less taxes. And if anything, if at all possible, it should be avoided. I rather suspect that some of the businesses closing down because of load shedding are actually in trouble anyway, load shedding or not. They're in trouble anyway, and load shedding just puts the additional burden on them, and the entrepreneur says, the hell with this. This is not worth doing. He's putting money in every month and has been doing so for maybe a year, and the business is not turning around, and load shedding is not helping. So, load shedding is to blame. The same thing we saw happen during COVID, where businesses that were distinctly unhealthy businesses um, used COVID as the sort of last straw to close. And that is sad because there are ways around it. And I was just thinking on load shedding. So, what do you do if you're running a business and you're looking at a future where you're going to get a couple of hours load shedding a day? Some of it, at least, is going to be during working hours. How are you going to get around that? Well, it depends on the type of business you run. If you're running a small, essentially online business, primarily online business, you need to secure your network. You need to have power packs on your modems, um, or you need to have uh, some kind of facility which allows you to keep your computers and your uh, um, modems and perhaps even the lights on, and that may mean an inverter. And I was quite intrigued um, to read during this week of a young man. I think he was in the Western Cape, and he stayed in an area, a very poor area. He stayed in an area where they were getting a lot of load shedding and a lot of power outages. And that meant that he was struggling with his matric studying. So he built an inverter to power his lights and his computer. Enterprising young man, and ended up winning the best technology student in the country award. So, you know, there's a little bit of innovation that came out, and he probably now has something which is already a very saleable device, as a special device for students and one person businesses and so on. So, some good has come out of it from there. But there are lots of other solutions. If you're running, as many of my friends and colleagues do, if you're running, say, a training business or a coaching business or a public speaking business, and you're dealing with overseas clients, as many people do these days, often they just do a time shift. So many of my colleagues work from, let's say, 9 at night until 7 in the morning. They are night workers because that's when their client is awake or clients are awake. Or they work from midnight till 4 in the morning, and then again from something like 8 in the morning until midday, because that's where the clients are found in other parts of the world. So you can do a time shift. Now, there's nothing to stop our businesses from doing a time shift. I used to do this regularly. When it came to the very hot times of the year, and you get sort of sleepy and lazy in the afternoon unless you have air conditioning, which I didn't have, then I used to start at 4 or 5 in the morning, work until mid morning or late morning, have some lunch, and then take the rest of the day off, sit around the pool or whatever. And I found that worked for me very, very well. So I just did a time shift because most of my work was done at my computer. It doesn't matter what time I'm working at my computer. So one of the solutions is a time shift. This even applied to the manufacturing industry. You might remember, Jacques, about 10 years ago, just after the horrific Mariacana massacre, there was a dreadful strike in the steel industry. I think it was a NUMSA strike.
Yep.
And it literally closed down the industrial areas. The strikers were very militant. They went marching around looking for operational factories. They searched out workers going to work. Quite a few were murdered, thrown off trains, or badly assaulted. and it was a very, very difficult time. They simply decided that they were going to close down the manufacturing sector in the country. They weren't entirely successful because a lot of enterprising manufacturers changed things around. At least one I know, and they make heavy machinery. Changed their business around so that during the daytime their car park was deserted, their lights were all off, their blinds were all drawn, and then at around 7 o'clock at night, everyone arrived and started their shift and left at sort of 4 in the morning. But because they were going the other way, they weren't called out by the strikers as workers. And many businesses did exactly the same thing. The business I'm thinking of was in Wadeville. And if you drove around Wadeville in the middle of the night, you could hear machines going everywhere. But the strikers were patrolling during the day. So they were very creative. They worked right through that horrendous strike. Others had different solutions. They only operated quiet processes. They never allowed cars to park in their parking lot. All cars were hidden somewhere else in the factory. Um, they never allowed visible deliveries to happen during working hours, and many other strategies like that. So, one of the ways that you can get around load shedding is time shift. And it's not as difficult as you think. Many workers do shift duty. Your petrol station attendant, your nurse, your policeman, um, pretty well many people we interact with do time uh, do shift work. And there's nothing that stops you doing shift work as well. The other thing is to be like the young man and use an inverter. That might not save you on electricity tariffs, but it will allow you to run, um, depending on the size of the inverter and the battery, will allow you to run a couple of computers, a lot of lights, um, and maybe a printer or two while load shedding is in progress. It's an expense, yes, but what's more expensive, closing the business or buying an inverter? Or go the whole hog and put the solar panels on the roof and the inverter and batteries into your offices and let the sun do the work rather than you. And so many businesses keep open by solar power. The town of Howick now has all of their streetlights solar powered. So they're independent of load shedding to keep the lights on as a safety reason in the town. We need a little bit more thinking around this thing, a little bit more creativity. And as a model, and I don't usually like to hold up criminals as models of behavior, but in this case, I'm going to hold up some criminals as a model. So let's take car theft. In the last 20 years, the anti theft devices on cars have grown into monsters. They can't be hot wired. You have keyless locks, you have biometric recognition, you have movement detectors, you have uh, 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 transponders that track the car if it moves without your authorization. You have an array of defenses on cars being stolen. Cars have never had so much hardware in them to stop them being stolen. And guess what? They still get stolen. The same thing happens too in our homes. So we don't like staying isolated on individual houses. So we band together and either close the area or move into complex where we can sit behind fences and perhaps security guards and controlled access and all of the other things. And guess what? Robberies still happen. Burglaries still happen. The criminals have looked at this and said, man, we got some tough opposition around here. We've got some things that are getting really difficult for us to operate in. And they've just said, well, let's get around that. And of course, one of the things that has happened, and it's a sort of undesirable side effect of all of the high fences and electric fences and all the other boom gates and all the rest of it, is that you've given the criminals a very clear indicator of where their target market should be, because that's where people have valuables. That's why they want to protect them. So the criminals have simply, and this applies to the most sophisticated estates in the country. Things happen in there. Crime happens in there. The criminals haven't gone away. The criminals have simply become more creative and more inventive. They've simply refused to say, well, we have a lot of things going against us, so we'll just quit. We'll go into a different line of business. Now, I don't want to hold them up as models, but I want to hold their methods up as models, or rather their attitude up as models. To say that we will find a way around all of these things, despite all of the advances being made in security. We will find our way around the CCTVs and the beams in the garden and the electric fences and all of the other things, and they do routinely. You only have to join one of the crime groups and your phone will go bing several times a day with yet another burglary or car theft or something like that. So take a model. I'm not suggesting that people turn to crime now to get over load shedding, but you can take a model from the attitude of those criminals and say, there are things we can learn from those guys. And maybe we should be learning things from those guys. And load shedding is only one of the issues that we need to face going forward. We need to look at the economy. We need to look at uh, um, the depreciation of the rand. We need to look at the costs of things. We need to look at crime itself, because crime affects all of us, affects all businesses. And once again, crime is becoming more and more innovative. So, whereas before someone would go in and try and shoplift in a shop, now you get 8 or 10 people storming into the shop, clearing out all the valuables and storming out again. Different methods, different results. We can examine how that has changed our world, and we can also protect ourselves against that, because crime will affect all of our businesses, from being hijacked to being to having robberies in stores and all of computers burgled and all that sort of thing. We need to take the right precautions. And perhaps next week we can talk about a few of those sort of things that we need to do to protect against cybercrime, to protect against personal crime, to protect against property crime. Um, and then also look at the economy and say, what do we need to do to manage in this very difficult economic time? I think we're pretty close to run out of time now, Jack.
Ed, yeah, I think these are all very practical. I mean, let's address the practical things, everything that we all sort of very concerned about, and we're looking to others for inspiration and so on. But I mean, just what you've discussed this afternoon. I mean, even just the time shift model. Interestingly enough, is like, oh, I went, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense, especially for uh, consultants, coaches, mentors, speakers working from home, looking at alternative target markets internationally in different time zones that you can therefore meet. Suddenly, you are available when people in South Africa are asleep, but the other parts of the world aren't. So, all of that. And what struck me with what you talked about in terms of the attitude of a criminal, the mindset of a criminal is to overcome increasingly sophisticated deterrents, barriers to their success. And yeah, it's really something to chew on and to say, but why don't they just give up? And so what comes to mind is this never say die attitude. There's a deterrent to business growth, personal growth. So what are we going to do to circumvent it, is the message that I'm certainly getting. And it's an attitude to dealing with barriers to success, come what may. and understanding that the world is not static. Things change, they are dynamic, and you got to move with the times. You got to want to grow with the times, outthink the times, even outsmart the times. Because, as you said, with increasing security measures, does robberies and theft and criminal activity die down? No. They kind of keep pace with all these things, which is quite interesting. So they have to think into, imagine if these people would apply themselves for work that actually is profitable, recognizable, and non-criminal.
Mm,
you
mm,
know,
mm.
but then again, that's another part of the mindset that we would want to adopt. But the leaf out of the example that you spoke about is once again it's attitude, and I think that's a wonderful reminder again. And then, how do we apply this attitude that you're talking about in terms of the economy and the things around the economy, like currency fluctuations, inflationary pressures? And I'm just thinking about just what's happening to our infrastructure, roads, potholes affecting transportation, the railways, all of those kinds of things that all have bearing on our personal lives, but definitely on our business lives. So yes, I look forward to the next coming few weeks, Ed.
Yeah, we look forward to it. Also, if I can just leave with the last message, it is probably not a bright idea to hang around and wait for things to get better. That's not likely to happen in the near future. And we've seen this with load shedding. A lot of people sort of hung in and said, oh, well, when load shedding stops, we will be able to. A lot of people did that with the coronavirus as well. They said, oh, well, when lockdown stops, we will be able to. Or when we're back to normal, we will be able to. And of course, when we finished with the pandemic, there was no normal as in the past. And I don't think we're going to see our normal of today again in the future. We live in
Yeah.
a very changing environment. And to just sit back and hope for better times, not the smartest move in town.
Yeah, Ed, and on that note, thank you very much for sharing with us today. And
Hmm.
for those of you listening and attending our event, thank you for your time and your attention. And until next week, bye for now.